So thanks again for joining us for Lessons into Blessing podcast, where we are leveling up investors in their financial freedom by sharing stories and strategies of everyday people who are leveling up their financial freedom through real estate. I have the pleasure of joining me today, Ruben Greth, managing partner of Legacy Acquisitions, a company that's partnered and whose partners have raised over 130 million in equity for multifamily and real estate deals. He is also the podcast host of the Capital Raiser Show, where he brings on some great syndicators and fund managers to help people learn best practices for raising private money for real estate and multifamily syndications. If you guys can give a warm welcome to Ruben Greth.
Crazy, right? It's funny how if you hang out with the right people, you can scale along with them and ride their coattails. I would say, like, of that money that we've raised, I'm probably like less than 10% of that is from my own efforts, although a lot of the upcoming efforts are going to be from what we've done to rebrand and create automation. So this will be a lot of fun. It's an honor to be here, Tari. So very excited.
No. Thank you. And we could talk about partnership, right? The beauty of partnership and being in the right spaces with the right people. If you want to kick off with that, just how you met your partner, how you got into this space, that'd be great.
So I've had multiple partners along the way. My first partner was a guy named Ivan who came from San Diego back in 2009, maybe late 2008. And if you recall correctly, there was a major real estate crash going on here in Phoenix, Arizona, probably one of the most affected areas. And he was buying up a fourplex, seemed like every other week. And so I was running a meetup and he showed up at one of them. And I said, dude, how the heck are you doing this, brother? So I asked him, is it cool if I follow you around to your projects and kind of film what you're doing there? And what I didn't realize at the time, through posting content that we had recorded, I started my first interview-based thought leadership platform on YouTube. And as a result of sharing what he was doing and nothing else, I raised an additional $625,000 on top of what he had already been raising to acquire a bunch of fourplexes and 12plexes back during the very bottom of the fire sale here in Phoenix. And I don't know if you recall this too, but there was some kind of a law that was passed to make I would say for undocumented workers to have legalities getting into like restaurants and other construction jobs. And all of these people in the middle of the crash, a lot of Hispanics just left Phoenix and went to Dallas and to Utah and Colorado, Chicago and California, and basically left the entire city of fourplexes completely empty. So we were able to purchase these at extraordinarily astronomically low prices. We're talking about like $20,000 a unit.
I do remember it was a mass exodus from real estate in Phoenix. And I would drive neighborhoods.
Me too.
And I would see neighborhoods that were just complete. Everyone had a foreclosure sale sign in their yard. It was bananas. 2,000 square foot homes going for like 30,000. It was crazy.
Yeah, in like 2004, 5, and 6, a lot of investors came to Phoenix and restored a lot of fourplexes. And then when the foreclosures and everything happened, all of these really nice condition fourplexes were just empty. And we could cherry pick the very best ones that had all the electrical equipment, all the copper, brand new roofs, brand new air conditioners at like $20,000 a unit. Sometimes they were like a house with a threeplex in the back. It was such an amazing time and one of the greatest transfers of wealth that we may ever experience in our lives here in Phoenix. So this is how I got my entrance. And I think when you and I met, I was still doing some personal development, trying to figure out my path into real estate and wasn't really too sure on where I would fall. But couple of the mentors that we were associated with, they told me about multifamily and I was like, I'm sold. Velocity of money. You got multiple people that are paying your rents. There's always, instead of having 100% vacancy, if somebody moves out, you only have like 10% or 20% vacancy and you just fill the thing up and it's always cash flowing. So I was like, yeah, sign me up for this. Multifamily is where it's at.
So I mean, you were lucky to catch the bottom. I mean, I was in there before the bottom. I bought right, and we could talk about that all day. Like you want to always make sure that you buy and make sure you're cash flowing so you can weather the storm. But you got in where a lot of people weren't able to get in because they were smashed, and you went out and just picked up the trails. And so share with us, just because a lot of people were jumping in the single family home space. You jumped into the multifamily home space. Share kind of your journey from that, where you started. I believe you said you were in the mortgage industry. Kind of share with us from that, how did you transition to the next step, kind of the next level? Like, how did you level up from where you were there to kind of your next stage?
There's been a bit about 3 levels.
Three
My
levels, yeah.
father was a real estate investor when I was a kid. He died when I was young, but I remember going to the different single family houses that he had and picking up rent. And that always resonated with me. I'm just like, man, I think that sounds like something I want to do. And when I got older, I was like, I'll eventually figure it out. Maybe I could become a doctor or something else, or some, pharmaceutical salesman. But there's nothing that ever really stuck with me as much as real estate and the concept of like leveraging other people where they pay off your mortgage and then you end up with a debt-free asset or a low leverage asset. So when I started buying fourplexes, we were having some success raising capital, but my partner was very focused on micromanaging the contractors, and I was very focused on marketing. And we kind of had some differences of opinions where he started not showing up for a couple of marketing meetings, and that was costing me some marketing dollars because people were supposed to interview him and he wasn't present or available. So he and I split up. And because I didn't know real estate very well or felt like I had my own track record, I didn't know how to find a new multifamily partner. I had this limiting belief that multifamily partners don't grow on trees, which I now know is a very incorrect belief. There's people that grow on trees for sure all across the country, and all of them have podcasts. They're very easy to find. But anyways, I ended up back in corporate America and couldn't stand being behind a desk. So eventually I got so frustrated that I had looked for my entrance back into real estate. And that's when I found a local syndicator that was doing heavy lift multifamily in different parts of Arizona. And I was like, hey, can I interview you guys? I want to know, who do I need on my team to create a nice syndication team? And they're like, well, what do you care for? I'm like, well, I used to raise capital for small multis. I figured, it'd probably be a good idea to start finding out, like who are the other key components of operations team so I can learn this game called syndication. And they're like, wait a second, you used to raise capital. How much did you raise? And I told them like 600,000. They're like, we need that kind of money for us, right? They were doing $5 million properties that required about $1.2 million raises. And if I could help them, that could at least solve half of their problem, right? So
Right,
I came
right.
on board with them and instantly picked up a book by Joe Fairless called The Best Ever Syndication or Best Ever Apartment Syndication book, and went right into the capital raising chapter. And it said, go start a podcast, go start an interview-based thought leadership platform. And I figured, hey, if these guys are bringing me on for capital and I'm going to start a podcast, might as well combine the two. Let's do a show called, the Capital Raiser Show, and introduce people to this concept that I'm very curious about. I'll interview the best guys across the country and see if I can get some of their tips. And what I didn't realize is that there was a lot of people that were also very hungry for capital raiser information. So the show kind of took off. And
Yeah.
that's like the phase 2 of my journey, I would say. Do you have any questions at this point?
Yeah, no, that's good. Because I think people's biggest fear is to just jump in, right? Like you just being able to get over the hurdle of, look, I'm just trying to learn, and hey, why not start a podcast um, to help not only myself level up, right, but help other people level up. And a lot of people think they have to have all the knowledge, they have to know all of the
Yeah.
all of the pieces of real estate to jump in. But you talked a lot about talked a little bit about partners And you were very intentional about really seeking out who are the best thought leaders in this space, right? And I think understanding how team plays a role is so critically important, right? Because this is, you can do real estate alone, but you're not going to get as far as you could by, having a team with you. So talk a little bit about just, we talk about, leveraging other people's money, but talk about a little bit about just like leveraging what you have to bring to the table, right? Like you being able to say, hey, yeah, I was able to capital raise, 600K. That was a skill set somewhere in there that you probably didn't even realize you had, where it's like, how did you leverage your skills to say, hey, this is what I bring to the table, and this is what makes me a good partner for a particular team?
Yeah. So the fast track to success is partnering with people that have done it before you and realizing that these huge investors that are taking down all these mega 200 unit and 400 unit properties, here's what most people don't realize is they're not like mega millionaires. They're just like dudes that you went to high school with. So that's part of the success track. And I guess I don't even know that I felt that I had any skills. Obviously, I could at least lean on my previous track record that I had raised, even though I credit a lot of that raising to the fact that I had a good partner, because they would have never invested with me if I didn't have a partner that had all these deals, right? So I was in the same boat once again, aligning myself with some people that had come before me that I could follow their track record. And I never realized that I had the skill to be a podcast host or a capital raiser without leveraging somebody else. And I think I've kind of started to feel a little bit different because I've interviewed so many people, kids that have raised for,
Wow.
200 unit properties, and old people and people of ethnic minority, and this just expansive conglomerate of people that all basically are not any more smarter than I am. Maybe they have some better partners or some different partners or some mentors that have been able to help them, but they're not any different than me. They're just the same as me. So
Yeah.
in this process of doing the podcast, I started learning specifically how to raise for syndications, which is essentially when you take a group of operators and people that can manage and acquire commercial real estate and this other group of limited partners that want to invest passively and create generational wealth, but they don't want to deal with toilets, tenants, termites, and putting in baseboards and all that stuff. These two groups partner together and they take down very large commercial real estate assets. In my industry, we mostly focus on multifamily and development. But what I didn't realize was that there's, from interviewing all these people and lawyers and fund managers on the show, is that there's more ways to raise capital than just from limited partners. You can also partner with fund managers, create your own fund, get preferred equity. You can do creative finance. You can work with institutions. You can borrow from family offices or ultra wealthy, high net worth individuals. So once I started realizing that there's all these capital raisers and these capital sources all across the country, I started thinking to myself, man, it'd be really nice to have access to deals outside of just Arizona. So I was like, I had this light bulb moment. I'm wondering if I can take these capital sources and these operators across the country that I've interviewed on my show, and I can put them together. And so I interviewed some attorneys on how do I do this legally compliantly. And they said, just go start your own fund. It's pretty easy. It costs a little bit of money, but it's not too complicated. Anybody can do it. And I was just like, oh, there's no way. Then maybe like once I do a bunch of syndications, I could become a fund manager, but I'm nowhere near the point where I could start my own fund. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to jump off the cliff and just figure it out along the way. I've always been an adrenaline junkie. So I figured, hey, what's the worst that could happen? I'll fall on my face and just either go back to corporate America or find another syndicator whose coattails I can ride and learn this. But so I went off to go launch my own fund when my existing partner is just like, hey, dude, instead of launching your own fund, in multifamily, people scale by investing with other multifamily partners They very rarely ever do it by themselves. And it's no different in funds. Instead of starting your own fund, why don't you partner with an existing fund manager? I've already done a few funds. I can pay for these funds. I'm good at acquisitions. I have lots of relationships like you. But what I'm kind of sucky at is marketing and notoriety and exposure and automations and branding and website development. And you have some mentors that really teach some amazing stuff in this space. Why don't you bring that to my team? And then I'll bring some of my skills and we can form this amazing business where we can help people create generational wealth while we also help ourselves and our partners, and our own bloodlines create generational wealth. So I was just like, hell yeah, sign me up for that right now. I'll do that all day long. So it took a little while to negotiate the partnership agreement, but now we've been in business for like 15 to 18 months or somewhere like that. And now we have about a $48 million worth of developments under construction. We've raised and partnered with some other amazing syndicators. And our next kind of phase that we're going into is we have some land that we have contracts to purchase with options to buy once the entitlements are complete. And so once we get the engineering approved by the city, we complete the purchase of this land where we're going to build another 220 units on one piece of land and another 240 on another, which if we successfully complete, I don't want to speak before the time has come, but we could potentially have 675 houses in 4 different subdivisions under development within the next 9 to 12 months, which is very exciting considering that I came from, very little and that I was just trying to get back into real estate coming from corporate America just a few years ago. So it's been a crazy ride.
No, that's awesome. I like that, the fact that you took the plunge, and even though you might not think that you had any skill, I think you had a skill of just knowing to align with the right people and finding and being able to just, like you said, you're a little bit more of a risk taker, just getting started and finding the right people to talk to until you really landed on the right one. And so maybe you didn't know your skills, but someone saw the skill set that you brought to the table and was able to fill that gap. And so now you're kind of in the build to rent space. You're talking a lot about entitlements and development. Help people understand what the build to rent space is, because that's, Arizona is really kind of picking up in that space. I was actually just looking at a graph of just new construction and what the build to rent space, it's starting to come up in the Arizona space. So can you just, and I know you have, build to rent in different states, but talk to people a little bit about what build to rent is and kind of how investors, it's still syndication, right? So it's still a pool of people coming down, take down land, and then to build on it. But talk a little bit about what that space is, just for people who don't know.
Sure. So build to rent is what we consider a form of multifamily investing, except instead of vertical multifamily, it's horizontal, and the units are not attached, right? So there's little yards in between them, but they're essentially the same size as a 2-bedroom apartment. They're about 1,100 square feet, 1,200 square feet, and you just build a bunch of them. You run them exactly like a multifamily property. You syndicate them exactly like multifamily, but they're all detached, which means that the renters are going to get brand new buildings where they live in with their own doggy door and their own little backyard and their own driveway. And they're going to treat it more like a home versus, a unit in some building. So they take care of it and they stay there longer. Instead of 18-month average, they stay there for 40 months on average. And we build these. Here's an important part to contemplate. Build to rent subdivisions is a very different business in Phoenix than it is in Portland, than it is in Florida, than it is where we're buying in Louisiana and Alabama, where the cities, where we're going, the land is incredibly cheap. They want to help acquire, or I should say, they're going to want to help people of the city acquire affordable housing, which there's a massive demand for, because you typically get either A class or, stuff that's like from the 80s or before. So we're building affordable units in beautiful areas with lots of trees and the amenities and the dog parks and the walking trails and all that stuff. And when you compare that to, for example, Phoenix, there's a couple of types of developers. One I would consider a housing developer that builds subdivisions, but they just sell them to individual retail buyers. And there's other communities that build smaller houses with smaller backyards, and they're designed to be rented out and managed the way a multifamily property is. And they're two very distinct business models that are going in opposite directions right now. And in Phoenix, there's a lot of red tape, so it's challenging to acquire and hold these things very quickly. So institutions come because they know if they put their money into one of these assets in year 3 to 5, after they've cleared all the red tape and developed these things out, it's going to be worth a lot of money. But for as me, a syndicator, I need to get my investor money back very quickly. So I can't really compete with these guys in Phoenix because they can deal with the red tape and bureaucracy for a lot longer and wait a lot longer than I can and my investors can. So this is why we go into Louisiana and Alabama and other areas where the land is incredibly cheap. Like we're buying 28 acres for $1 million. In Phoenix, it probably cost $140,000 per acre. So we can't get things to pencil. I'm sure they're worth quite a bit at the end of the day, but we go into markets like that where we have long-term relationships with developers and we follow them. The developers actually just follow people that are bigger than they are. Like we just got introduced to a city called Foley, Alabama. And the reason that we found this is because we followed DR Horton there, and they just bought a property for $16 million and doubled it within a few years. So we want to basically replicate what they're doing and do it in places like I mentioned where it's inexpensive to build, and we have a favorable government that is helping us get across the finish line quickly. So that helps us get our investor capital back quickly. Portland is a very different market, in California and New York. If you're going to build there, you probably have to deal with rent control, or actually somebody just told me that rent control doesn't apply to new buildings, but nevertheless, it's not a market where we feel like we know the market and the government and everything else behind it. We're not well entrenched in the politics. But, this is why we've kind of selected our specific properties. But at the end of the day, essentially, it's just a multifamily development, what we're doing in the built to rent space, or at least in our business model of that. So that's kind of what we're doing. And it's a very fun playground to be at. And I had never developed anything prior to partnering with my existing partner and our developers in the Southeast. So it's been a wild ride trying to learn this whole development thing and get investors educated on this space in a relatively quick fashion, in about a year.
Gotcha. And I was going to say, just it sounds like, once again, aligning with developers, right? And finding the right people to know where to go, right? And to
It's a team
understand
sport.
what markets, because locating the markets you want to invest in is an important part of the whole real estate journey, whether it's built to rent, multifamily, single family, right? You want to make sure that you understand your market and your submarkets of where you want to invest. So you kind of have your reason, and I'm sure the players that are in Arizona, they have their whatever advantage to be able to play in this market where they can differentiate themselves. What are the things, some people say, well, man, development takes so long, like my money's tied up, right? As a limited partner who's saying, hey, I want to put my money into something built to rent. What is the advantage of putting your money into a build to rent type of space versus kind of a multifamily space? It's already ready. It's already leased up. I don't really have to go through, waiting on land to be, things to entitlements and all that stuff to be approved to kind of build the land up, get the necessary power, all of that stuff. So take people through why it's different in the build to rent space as an investor, and I'm saying as a passive investor. So me investing my money into kind of a build to rent space of something that has to be developed versus a existing multifamily.
Yeah, let's cover some of the niches. So not just build to rent. So if you just take multifamily, you have A class, B class, C class, you got heavy lift, and you got assisted living and or student housing, or kind of like the main branches. And then, each one of those is going to have a different thing that you're looking for if you're a passive investor or if you're an investor in general. On some of those niches, you're going to be able to cash flow from day one. In others, you may not cash flow as much, but you may have a bigger equity share at the end. And in some cases, you're not going to have any cash flow until the entire thing is gutted and rebuilt. And then you're going to look for a big equity play at the back. In build to rent, it's kind of a combination of things. So in our business model, we don't start raising for the build to rent until we've already completed the purchase of the land. So that prevents investors from having to wait that extra year or however long it takes for the entitlements to happen so that your money's not sitting there doing nothing. So once we have the property purchased, you can then complete engineering, put in your infrastructure, your horizontal infrastructure, which is street, sewers, electric, stuff like that, walking parks, slabs, all of that stuff, utilities, phones, or whatever, cable, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, that process typically doesn't take very long, we can build about 10 to 20 houses a month. So if we're talking about a 100 to 200 unit subdivision, that thing could be done in 6 to 12 months. And then as we are building these things, unlike a vertical multifamily, you don't have to wait until the entire thing is built before you can start leasing. You build 10 houses, you lease them. You build another 10, you build another 10, and then you lease them. And then by the time that you have 100 units or 200 units built, it's already 70 to 80 to 90% occupied. And you've been renting these at almost full price and increasing rents along the way. So that means you start cash flowing probably in the middle of the second year. So maybe 18 to 24 months, you're already breaking even and cash flowing. And then at that point, we're not selling these things off to individual retail buyers. We're selling these things off to institutions that want to buy a portfolio of assets consisting of single family houses that are managed with one property manager and one leasing agent. And it's essentially a property that's worth a lot more than a multifamily because they're detached, but yet at the same time, you get all the advantages of multifamily because it's run the same way a multifamily is. And there's incredible demand from institutions and these huge buyers and banks that want this kind of product. And us as developers, we can only provide them with about 2% of the entire demand. So there might be $500 billion of money that's wanting to park their money into single family subdivisions. And they probably have already invested that much into multifamily because institutions own about 50% of the multifamily in the country, but they only own 2% of the houses in the country. So if they can buy these assets that are like a hybrid of multifamily and houses, this is a very desirable asset that cash flows and does incredibly well for them. So we know that we're going to be, able to sell these subdivisions off as soon as they're built and stabilized, which we believe it takes us about 3 years. But of course, we want to be conservative and underwrite them as if it's going to take 5 years, which is essentially the same as a value add multifamily deal. So those are kind of some of the similarities and differences.
Wow, that's good. And it's good to understand the exit strategy on that because even I didn't know that. Build to rent, I've heard about it. It's been thrown around a lot, but kind of a new space for me as well.
It's a
So
fun space. Really cool.
it sounds like it. And I'll probably have to, have you on again just to kind of break down that in general. But because it's Lessons into Blessings show, I want to end off the show on just what is the biggest obstacle that you've had to overcome in your real estate journey, and kind of the lessons, how you were able to pivot from that, right? And turn it into a blessing, because this is really what the show is about, getting people off the fence, knowing that, hey, when you jump into real estate, it's there's going to be challenges, but Really want to share, people's stories on how they were able to pivot out of those challenges.
Yeah, a lot of the obstacles, so at least the road that I want to go down for this part, this end of the show, it's been great being here. But I'd say a lot of it is self imposed limiting beliefs and saboteurs of your own mind, and, self sabotaging behaviors. And the fear of failure, of course, is a big one, and imposter syndrome, and like trying to figure out if you can actually do it and believe in yourself. And of course, the circle of influence that you have has a big dramatic effect on how you feel about yourself. And when people don't recognize you or identify you as a real estate investor, and you're just kind of like the kid and cousin that they grew up with in high school, it's hard for them to believe in you because they've never had you seen success. But what one of the fast tracks, I think we mentioned it earlier in the show, to success is to just surround yourselves with the right mentors and influences and partners that can help you break through your own self-imposed limiting beliefs. And the fast track is also to realize that these guys, they're just average people that don't have any specific skill sets other than track record and experience. And they don't have any unique abilities that are not innate in you by nature already. It's very common to believe that we can't do it, or that we could never have enough money, or that we can't raise the capital, or we could never master underwriting or acquisitions or math or any of these things called marketing or rebranding. But the reality is that it's an entirely it's a sport built on partnerships, right? Because if you have somebody that's good at acquisitions, another person that is a visionary, another person that's good at marketing, one that's good at capital raising, one that's good at underwriting, one that's good at acquisitions, anything else that I've missed, another person that's good at development, and you put all of these pieces together, it starts to form and create a very powerful team. Because a lot of people ask me, they're like, hey, what do you know about this part of the development and this part of the entitlements and this part of the politics? And I'm like, you know what? Like, I stay in my lane. I basically focus on creating the relationships with the capital allocators and the limited partners. And then when people have questions about the specifics and dynamics around the underwriting, I turn that over to the people that are good at that. If you want to know how this thing is developed and what kind of construction it's done, and what is the concrete board made out of, and is there insulation, like, I don't know the answers to that stuff, but I can put you on the phone with the developer. And same thing with the person that's in charge of acquisitions. They can tell you how we select the land and why. So this is kind of like the main thing that I've had to figure out, is like, how do I get past my own limitations, and how do I latch onto a team that can get me to the promised land?
I love that promised land. That's real right there. That's real. So really circle yourself around with the right people, you know, getting over your own. It's really, I think there's self-work that has to be done.
For
And,
sure.
and really understanding what and why your mind keeps holding you back, right?
A lot
But
of
surrounding
personal
yourself around
development.
a different crowd definitely helps for sure.
Yeah. Personal
And
development and personal development audio and coaches, man, does wonders.
for sure, invest in yourself. I'll take that as a takeaway as well. Do not be afraid to invest in yourself. I've spent a lot of money investing in myself, even when I don't want to spend money, right? And
Good.
learning, and it's helped me to really overcome some of the things that have held me back. So I love that one. And then stay in your lane. Like, if you bring certain skills to the table, and there's other people that you've partnered with, that are excellent, hand it off, right? And really, knowing where your gaps are and being able to fill them, I think is critical.
100%. Thank you so much. This
Yeah.
has been amazing.
No, thanks, Ruben. I appreciate just having you on the show and joining us. And I won't take them through any of our personal development stories, because I remember just
We could
being in
have
the
a
gym
show just
saying,
on that.
yeah, I'm beautiful in the gym. Like, just getting over fears of doing stuff. It was excellent for that standpoint. So you said you were a risk taker, but I was absolutely not a risk taker. I think people see me as a risk taker, but That definitely helped push me past my comfort levels. And I think everyone should have that experience of being able to just learn how to push yourself and to shift when you have fear rise up. So thank you again for joining us. This ends our session, and you can find Ruben at the Capital Raiser Show on Apple Podcasts, right? Apple, Spotify. I think they could pretty much find you on anywhere, huh?
Pretty much everywhere. Pandora,
Yeah, love it. Love it.
Spotify,
Love it. Love
et cetera, et cetera.
Cool beans. Well, until next time, stay blessed.
Thank you, Tari.
Thank you.